Hey guys, welcome back to Preteen Ministry. This is our third class. To give you a recap, last time we talked about the needs of preteens, and I hope you got a lot out of that. We're going to go dive into today exactly kind of step by step how Gen Z came to be. And we're going to do that by these next two sessions, today and Thursday. We're going to be talking about like the making of Gen Z by starting with the oldest living generation today. So I'm going to start off with prayer. We're going to do some generational studies the next 2 days. It's important for you guys to know these because it's important to know where we come from. It's important to know like cause and effect. It's important to know like this happened, therefore this is happening. So Father God, we thank you so much for this time together. And I pray right now that you would open up our hearts, open up our minds to receive everything that you have for us. I also pray that you would even bless us with new strategies, not just on how to reach preteens, but all generations. Lord, even though this is a preteen class and we want to be effective in that regard, we also know that your heart is for all people and for all ages. We love you, and I ask you to bless this time in Jesus' name. Amen. So let's get right into it. The making of Gen Z. Now, it's important to know when we're talking about Gen Z that they are in a collection of generation. They're a collection of ideas. George Barna, he recently did a study about Gen Z that says that they are the most open-minded generation of all time. Now, because of this, they're extremely receiving of the gospel, but at the same time, they also receive every other philosophical ideal. And so let's back up a little bit to talk a little bit about history. There is this term called Pax Americana. It's a state of relative international peace. That's what Pax means. It means peace. And it's regarded as being overseen by the U.S. Some historians consider this time beginning post-Civil War or post-World War II. It's the idea that the U.S. or U.S. idealisms have infiltrated the world stage and it's secured the USA as this international superpower or world power. And thus, culture on a global scale is being influenced by what happens in the United States. Now, we don't like to talk about American exceptionalism nowadays. We oftentimes associate the United States with, evil, that they're the cause of so many people's suffering. That one U.S. senator actually said that America invented slavery, that slavery didn't exist until the United States. How foolish is that? Especially when we look at the scriptures and we see that slavery existed long before America was even a dream. But the reality is that Pax is a time of peace. USA, during post-Civil War or post-World War II, we brought in these ideas of hard work and there was these like push for missions. And that's actually what happens in these Paxes. And we're not the first one. There was Pax Britannica, Pax Romana, and it's these big global empires that basically said, you know what, we have the resources now to influence culture, and that's what they did. And a lot of times we don't like to know that this country came over here to say, hey, we're going to change you people. But at the same time, there's also some good stuff that comes out of that. Pax Americana is the idea that USA is not inherently evil. Pax Americana is the idea that the U.S. has some good stuff to offer historically and still to this day. Now, the reason I bring up Pax Americana is because a lot of the things that we're going to be talking about over the course of these next 2 days and even throughout this class is that the U.S. is impacting culture worldwide. Now, there may be times when a trend that happens here doesn't happen in another country for another, 1-2 years, but with technology, it's actually made those trends even more widespread. We're talking about the generations, and how do we get to Gen Z? Now, the lost generation, born 1890 to 1915, the youngest of these is 105, and the oldest is 130. Now, you may say to me, well, why are you even bringing these people up? Well, it's because I actually know of a person that just passed away today at 106 years old. So we don't want to diminish. Life is valuable. So we're going to talk about every living generation that exists today. It's important to know when these generations are coming of age, because that shapes kind of their worldview. So the lost generation came of age during the Roaring Twenties. The Roaring Twenties were a time of partying, great economic prosperity. It was a time of just throw caution to the wind, alcohol, soaring stocks. It was in terms of the economy and in terms of like the world, it was seen as this like prosperous time, but they were lost. They didn't know there was nothing that they really did that made a difference. Then we have the greatest generation, the youngest 96, oldest 110, born between 1910 and 1924. And they came of age during the Depression or during World War II. Now, this generation was really interesting because the previous generation was kind of lost in all of their partying, and this generation kind of rose up out of their kind of slumber and said, we're going to fight the good fight. The reason why we call them the greatest generation is because there was this sense of going out into battle, fearlessness, manly men, feminine women, God and country. It was like this sense of patriotism. But because of the Depression in World War II, it also, because that's when they were coming of age, it also tainted their ideas a little bit. And it was actually World War II that was kind of the first thrust of fatherlessness in homes in America and worldwide, because it was a world war. So let's get into the silent generation, 1925 to 1945, the youngest today being 75 and the oldest being 95. Now, these came of age during like World War II or like post-war. And we see the reason why they're called the silent generation is because, there was a lot of people doing a lot of things, but in this particular generation, they just wanted, they wanted to be left alone to do their own thing. They just got out of some of them are just getting out of the Depression. Some of them are just trying to figure out their own life. And they're like, we don't want to make waves. We just want to live life peacefully. We just want to mind our own business. And they became known as the silent generation. The baby boomers are born 1946 to 1964. The youngest being 56 and the oldest being 74. Well, baby boomers get a lot of attention because, and the reason why they're called baby boomers is because it's a very big generation. They're coming of age during the hippie movement. Because of the fatherlessness that was passed down to them, they inherited because of World War II, there wasn't a lot of guidance, and so then the hippie movement came along and really twisted a lot of minds. And we're going to be talking about boomers in detail here in a little bit, so I just want to go through this list. I just want to give you an overview of these generations, and then we're going to talk about some of the more prominent ones in detail. So next is Gen X, 1965 to 1979, youngest 41, and the oldest 55. And they're coming of age. This is the first time where it's not like a major like event, as it was MTV that was really their coming of age. TV raised Gen X. They're called the latchkey kids because, their parents would be off at work, and then the kids would be left at home after school just letting TV parent them. And MTV was like the big thing during their coming of age. Generation Y, also known as millennials. That's me, and that's some of you. 1980 to 1995, the youngest being 25, oldest being 40. We're coming of age during the recession in 9/11. One of the things that actually marks millennials is that we're very cautious about money. And part of that was because of the recession. And so we're very insecure in a lot of ways. And that insecurity was brought about because of these events. Then Gen Z comes along, 96 to 2010, youngest being 10 years old, oldest being 24, and they're coming of age during gay marriage. That's like the thing in culture that is influencing them more than anything else. Out of this agenda actually stems things like the transgender movement. Out of these things comes like non-binary and all these different labels and different identities, and because I'm going to show you that generation after generation that the world system is chipping away and chipping away and chipping away so that we will accept anything and everything. Generation Alpha is the newest generation, 2011, and going through 2025 when we get there. The youngest is being born as today, and the oldest this year is going to be 9. And we don't know what their coming of age is going to look like. 2020 looks crazy. We can't even imagine what 2021 is going to bring. A lot of times as Christians, we're like, Lord, just bring us, just bring us like the rapture so that we can get out of here, and so that Gen Alpha doesn't have to experience all this craziness. But I'm always the person that says there's hope. I'm not the type of Christian that will say, oh, Jesus just has to come back. I'm just waiting for Jesus. No, while I'm waiting, I'm going to work while I'm waiting. I want to build a lifestyle for the generations that are following me that have economic prosperity. I want to build integrity. I want to build hard work. I want to build manliness in men, femininity in women. I want to leave godly values to the generations that are following. And so when we're talking about these generations, it's important to know, what type of generation are you wanting to build? What type of generation do you want coming after you? You may be curious on why we have these arrows. And I'm going to show you that, in my opinion, and again, this is my opinion, you can argue with me all you want, that's your prerogative. I'm going to show you that these generations are cyclical. So in the lost generations, kind of like Gen X, the greatest generations, kind of like millennials, the silent generations, kind of like Gen Z, and the baby boomers are going to be kind of like Alpha. I believe that the generations can be looked at through the lens of our biblical forefathers, Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, and Joseph. Now, the reason I say that is because there's a lot of similarities, and I want to share with you some of those similarities. So with all the time we have left for this class, we're going to go through in detail the boomers and the Gen Xers. And in the next class, we're going to talk about millennials, and then we're going to talk about Gen Z. So Abraham's an interesting person. All right, he left behind a place of brokenness. He left his father's home. In a lot of ways, he was pioneering a new place with Canaan. He worked hard, built a business from scratch. He protected his families, protected his lands, and he believed God to fulfill the promises that God gave him for his future. Baby boomers, in a lot of ways, are the same. They left behind the brokenness and poverty of World War II. In a lot of ways, they were fatherless, like we had talked about. They pioneered a new America. They worked hard to build new businesses and a stable economy. They fought against tough competitors, and they had faith for a better future. So when you hear the word Abraham, I want you to think about the baby boomers. And so when you think about like their faith, I don't want you to see baby boomers from this perspective of just like oh, they're just outdated. No, baby boomers are just as vital as the rest of us. I love you, baby boomers, for those of you that are watching. I love you so much. I've learned so much from you. In fact, the most shining examples of faith in my life have been from baby boomers. For the boomer, here's some of their influences. We talked about they came of age during the hippie movement. Well, here's some of the important events that shaped them. JFK and MLK assassinations, the U.S. defeat in Vietnam, Watergate scandal, hippie movement, the civil rights movement, the women's liberation, moon landing, the Red Scare of communism or the Cold War, the Cuban Missile Crisis. I mean, these were huge major events that are shaping them. And what's crazy is all this stuff is going on, and they're still have this pioneering spirit. They still have this hope for America. It's really interesting now. They're coming of age during the women's liberation, civil rights movement. And so a lot of people credit them as the one that are spearheading those type of movements. But they're the ones that are they're kind of like the ones that are in the streets protesting. But it's actually some of the silent generation that actually broke away from that stigma to lead those particular movements. And we're going to talk about later on this semester how there's been really holy women's liberation movements and very unholy women's liberation movements. There's been a very holy civil rights movement, and there's a very unholy civil rights movement. And we're going to talk about those differences as time progresses in this class. Now, important music for baby boomers, for those of you that love Elvis Presley, Bob Dylan, who apparently went to CFNI for a short stint, the Beatles, Rolling Stones. Baby boomers grew up on blues, rock, and folk music. They grew up in what they thought was the golden era of music. Important products that came out of this baby boomer generation. Barbie, for those of you that didn't know, that was their thing. Disney, Walmart, invention and expansion of television. I mean, we're being impacted for generations by these things. I mean, Disney alone, just think about how much your life has been influenced by Disney. Just by the stuff you watch, the stuff you buy, the sports you watch. I don't know if you knew, they own ESPN. And we're going to talk about that later on as well. Baby boomers. What's really interesting about them is that they are really strong work ethic. They're really focused, super confident, goal-oriented, competitive. They love face-to-face interactions, and they're disciplined. These are some very strong pros. But like anybody else, there are some cons. Because they're such pioneers, it left little time for family. They got tunnel vision. They're like, I have this purpose, I have this drive. And so sometimes if you're not in that tunnel, you're not in their life. Sometimes they can be too confrontational, too much pressure over self. Inflexible or immovable. One of the biggest criticisms for millennials is that boomers are just so stubborn. They don't like online interactions. Let's talk about this for a second. If you're a boomer watching this, I'm just letting you know I love you, but I do not love this about you. All the chain mails that you were used to getting via email back in the 90s, that does not work on social media. I love the insurance commercials, which you have the woman that's putting pictures on her wall, and the friend is just like, that's not how that works. And she's just like, I'm posting pictures of my friends on my wall. And she's like, that's not how that works. It's just because they didn't grow up with it. I don't judge them for it, harshly anyways. I know it sounds a little bit like judgment where I'm just like, yeah, I don't like that too much. But it's only because they didn't grow up with it. Social media, should be used by the people who know how to use it. And sometimes that's not even me. I didn't even start using social media until much later in the game. And I'm a millennial. In some ways, I'm a classical millennial. In other ways, I kind of fall into this boomer category just because, I have so much respect for them. And we're going to pause here. We're going to watch a short video that I think would be a little bit funnier than just me explaining it on boomers and how they interact with technology. And this isn't meant to hurt any of you who are in this age range. It's just to give you an idea that boomers didn't grow up with technology. So there's not this idea of comfort that millennials or Gen Z have. And so we're going to watch this video. It's funny. We'll come back and we'll talk about it.
Instead of mailing everyone my vacation photos, I'm saving a ton of time by posting them to my wall.
Ooh, I like that one.
It's so quick. It's just like my car insurance. I save 15% in just 15 minutes.
I saved more than that in half the time.
I'd unfriend you.
That's not how it works. That's not how any of this works.
I love that commercial. It's really funny. And part of the reason what makes it so funny is because it just pokes fun a little bit. And that's okay. We can poke fun at ourselves. When did we stop being a generation that laughs? If anything, 2020, we need to lighten up a little bit and realize that, God invented laughter. And this is a great segue into our next generation that we're going to talk about, which is Gen X. And Isaac is that Gen X generation. And the reason I say laughter is a good segue is because Isaac's name means laughter, or specifically in the original Hebrew, it means who's laughing now. God's telling Sarah through the name of Isaac, who's laughing now? In case you don't know the story, Sarah and Abraham are promised a child in their old age. And Abraham laughed, Sarah laughed. And they're like, how can we even begin to conceive a thought of conceiving? And so God, in his humor, gave them Isaac and said, who's laughing now? He was the bridge between the stories of Abraham and Jacob. He was a good businessman, but he wasn't the leader his dad was. Compared to Abraham and Jacob, there's really not a lot written about his life. Gen X, they're the bridge between the baby boomers and millennials. They're often better managers than they are leaders. And compared to baby boomers or millennials, media just kind of overlooks them. They kind of don't exist. There's this, generation war between boomers and millennials. But when it comes to Gen X, they're just like, how come you guys aren't talking about us? How come we don't get any attention? And it's because they're the bridge. Gen X are very important because they're the bridge. Now, they grew up during the time of the Bill Clinton impeachment. In case you don't know what that is, basically he was unfaithful to his wife with a person that worked inside the White House, but then he was acquitted. There was the Challenger explosion, the Desert Storm War, the LA riots, which are kind of like what we see today, just in some ways a lot more condensed area because it specifically affected LA. And so in some ways there was some more violence. The influences for Gen X, we have the Bill Clinton impeachment. In case you don't know what happened there, Bill Clinton was our president in the 90s, and he was unfaithful to his wife with the woman that worked at the White House. But then he was acquitted. Challenger explosion, the Desert Storm, LA riots, kind of like what we see across our nation, except localized in LA. We saw the AIDS epidemic. We saw 24-hour media. Before there wasn't this constant news cycle going on. There wasn't this constant access to information. And now with Gen X, they're starting to become this constant access to information and entertainment. Important music for Gen X: Michael Jackson, Madonna, Nirvana, Run DMC. So they got hop, hip hop, metal, punk, grunge. Some of the bands, these are some of the bands I grew up listening to. So again, these are all generalities. Just because you like Michael Jackson and you're a Gen Z doesn't mean anything. That's okay. I'm just giving you a general framework for how we're thinking about things. So and let me put this in perspective for you. If Madonna is going to be the woman that's your role model, then what the role model you're getting is that, sex is just kind of cheap. That you can just kind of sell your body, that you can just kind of sleep with whoever you want, and that's completely acceptable. If your role model was Nirvana, then what you're getting is that suicide is something to be glorified. And so I want to show you that these things are influencing us. We're being torn down. We're being chopped up. Our morality is being chopped up. We're like the frog. There's this analogy where when you cook a frog, you don't throw the frog in just a pot of boiling water. It's just going to jump out. What you do is you put the frog in lukewarm water and gently turn up the temperature until it's cozy and cozy and cozy and cozy until it doesn't even realize that it's cooked. And so culture is turning up the temperature just a little bit at a time until our morality is cooked. To where even as Christians, we're accepting homosexuality. Even as Christians, we're accepting gender confusion. Even as Christians, we're accepting that we can be our own God, and that, all these things that used to be so fundamental to Christians, these things that God says a lot of stuff about, we've just accepted them as norm because we're getting our morality cooked, and sometimes we don't even realize it. So let's talk about some of the important products. MTV, VCR, Nintendo came out during this era. PCs, Transformers, He-Man, Hot Wheels, Star Wars, Saved by the Bell. That was my jam. So let's talk about pros and cons for Gen X. They were self-sufficient because they were latchkey kids. Remember, you had boomer parents who were tunnel visioned, focused, pioneering, wanted to work. And so latchkey children, Gen X children, were staying at home, watching television, playing video games. So they became very self-sufficient. They're very flexible. All right, they value work-life balance. They saw that their parents worked hard and didn't have any time for life. And so they wanted to be able to enjoy the fruits of their labor. They're resourceful. They were affluent. The 80s was a very affluent time. They were entrepreneurial and efficient. Some of the cons of Gen X: skeptical. They're hard to, they don't trust easy. Some of them are lazy because, what happens when all you do is watch TV and play video games? There's a laziness factor that sets in. You become apathetic. You become compromising. Even if you have Christian values, if all you're doing is sitting at home watching television and playing video games, you're going to compromise because the message coming across into your brain is not a godly message. You're going to compromise at some point. Some of the cons are they lack leadership, too much spending. They play too hard at times. Gen X is known during the 80s as work during the day, party at night. There was a lot of drugs and alcohol flowing during the 80s. It was and that's why I say it was kind of like that, the time of the roaring 20s. Because there was a lot of partying, stocks were up, economy was great, but morality was being impacted in a negative way. And we have to understand that morality, there's a line as Christians that we have to draw in the sand for ourselves. And that's where we can learn from all these different generations. The boomers may have been inflexible, but they drew a line. They said, we're not going to cross this line. That's being steadfast. You as a Christian today, you may see all these things going on. And some of you may accept that all drugs should be legal like Rand Paul, the senator, does. You may accept that homosexuality, is just a normal part of life now. You may accept that, God does not say anything about identity. You may accept that the Bible maybe isn't completely true and it's open to your own interpretation of how you feel. You may believe all those things, and it's because you haven't drawn a line in the sand. You haven't said to yourself, I believe God's word, whether I agree with it or not. That's part of our life as a Christian. There is a sense in showing compassion, but we do not sacrifice truth on the altar of compassion. Truth is constant. Truth is Christ. Truth is His word. And we have to make His word premier in our lives. Righteousness exalts a nation. Righteousness will exalt your life. Righteousness is always the foundation for which we need to build our lives. In all ways, Christ is preeminent. In all ways, Christ deserves the glory. In all ways, Christ has laid claim over your life. And it's up to you if you will live your life as a Christian or if you will live your life as something else. So many times because of the dissecting of our morality over time, because of our morality getting cooked like that frog, because of these things, like we've accepted that we can be a Christian and we can be everything else. But Jesus says, I am Lord. Choose you this day whom you will serve. Choose you this day. If it means being inflexible, be inflexible. But at the same time, know that God loves you and He cares for you and He's got a plan for you. We're going to pick up the study on generations in the next class. Love you. Thank you. Thank you for tuning in.